Imagine a world where a single nation, born from the ashes of the Mongol Empire, grows to become one of the most powerful empires in history. This is the story of the Russian Empire. In the 14th century, nestled amidst the vast Eurasian plains, lay the modest Principality of Moscow. This was a realm under the yoke of the formidable Mongol Empire, a force that had swept across Asia and Europe, leaving a trail of conquest in its wake. The Mongol yoke, as it came to be known, was not a time of prosperity for the people of Moscow, but it was a crucible that would forge a nation. Enter Ivan III, the Grand Prince of Moscow. A shrewd and ambitious leader, he had a vision of a united, independent Russia. He was not content with being a mere vassal to the Mongols. He saw the potential in his people, in his land, and he longed for freedom. In the late 15th century, Ivan III decided to challenge the status quo. He refused to pay tribute to the Mongols, effectively throwing off the Mongol yoke. This act of defiance was not without consequence, but Ivan III was prepared for the backlash. His armies clashed with the Mongols in a series of conflicts known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River. This struggle marked the end of Mongol dominance over Russia and the beginning of a new era. In the aftermath, Ivan III took up the ancient title of Tsar, the Russian word for Caesar. With this title, he declared himself the first ruler of all Russia. He sought to unify the myriad of Russian lands under one banner, under one rule. This was a bold move, a daring vision, but it was just the first step on the road to building an empire. And so, from these humble beginnings, the Russian Empire was born. As the Russian Empire grew, it sought new lands and new ideas. This hunger for expansion was championed by two formidable leaders, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. Their reigns marked an era of transformation, bringing about a wave of westernization and modernization that would forever change the course of Russian history. Peter the Great, a colossal figure both in stature and in impact, had an insatiable curiosity about the West. His grand tour of Europe revealed to him a world of innovation and enlightenment that he yearned to bring to his homeland. He introduced a series of reforms aimed at modernizing Russia and transforming it into a maritime power. He built a new capital, St. Petersburg, a city that was to become Russia's window to the West. But Peter's aspirations didn't stop at Western ideas. His gaze was also set on new lands. Through a series of wars with Sweden in the early 18th century, he secured access to the Baltic Sea, paving the way for Russia to become a significant naval power. As we turn the page to Catherine the Great, we find a ruler no less ambitious than her predecessor. She continued the westernization efforts begun by Peter, bringing in European intellectuals and artists, and fostering a climate of intellectual freedom. The Enlightenment found a home in Russia under her reign. Catherine, too, had territorial ambitions. She presided over the partitioning of Poland, annexing large parts of the country to the Russian Empire. Her successful war against the Ottoman Empire also led to the acquisition of Crimea, further expanding Russia's influence in the Black Sea region. These were not merely acts of conquest. They were strategic moves designed to secure Russia's position on the world stage. The acquisition of new territories brought wealth and resources, while the embrace of Western ideas spurred cultural and scientific advancements. Through conquest and enlightenment, Russia became a major player on the world stage. Under the leadership of Peter and Catherine, the Russian Empire expanded its borders and broadened its horizons, carving out its place in the annals of global history. While the Russian Empire expanded and modernized, not all its people shared in its prosperity. This statement rings particularly true for the serfs. Serfdom, a form of bondage for peasants, was deeply ingrained in Russian society. Serfs were tied to the land they worked on, and that land was owned by the nobility. They were not slaves, but they were not free either. They could not legally leave the land they toiled on, and their labor was at the disposal of the landowner. The serfs made up the backbone of the Russian economy. They worked the fields, tended to livestock, and provided the manpower that drove the empire's agricultural wealth. The nobility, in return, was obligated to protect and provide for the serfs. But the reality was often quite different. The serfs lived in harsh conditions, worked long hours, and were subject to the whims of their masters. This system of serfdom was not without its critics. Many saw it as a barrier to Russia's progress. They argued that it stifled innovation, hindered economic growth, and fostered social inequality. But the institution was so deeply rooted in Russian society that change was slow and difficult. One of the most striking examples of serf unrest was the Pugachev Rebellion. Led by Emelian Pugachev, a runaway serf, the rebellion was a violent uprising against serfdom and the oppressive rule of the nobility. Pugachev promised the serfs land and freedom, a promise that resonated with the oppressed peasantry. The rebellion was ultimately crushed, but it served as a stark reminder of the discontent brewing among the serfs. The institution of serfdom had profound effects on Russian society and economy. It entrenched social inequality, stifled economic growth, and led to widespread unrest. It also became a defining issue in Russia's internal struggles. The serfs, despite their hardships, were not passive victims. They resisted, they rebelled, and they left an indelible mark on the history of the Russian Empire. The question of serfdom would come to define much of Russia's internal struggles. As the winds of change blew through Europe, they also reached the shores of the Russian Empire. The mid-19th century was a time of great tumult and transformation. Among the most significant forces of change was Tsar Alexander II, who ascended to the throne in 1855. Known as the Tsar Liberator, Alexander was a reformist at heart, and his policies were a stark departure from the autocratic rule of his predecessors. His most notable reform was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861, a move that freed over 20 million people from the shackles of serfdom. This monumental act was not without its complications. While the serfs were now technically free, they were still tied to the land and burdened with redemption payments. This led to widespread dissatisfaction and unrest, and the newly freed populace was left grappling with a sense of betrayal and disillusionment. The Tsar's vision of a harmonious society was far from realized. In the midst of growing social discontent, political unrest began to stir. The Emancipation Act, rather than placating the masses, had unintentionally sparked a flame of rebellion. New ideologies began to take root, and revolutionary movements started to form. Populist groups such as the Narodniks sought to incite a peasant uprising, while other factions championed Marxist ideals. This era of reform and rebellion reached its tragic climax in 1881 with the assassination of Alexander II. The Tsar's progressive policies had made him a target of radical groups, and his death marked a violent end to a period of significant change. Yet, his legacy lived on. His reforms had set in motion a series of events that would profoundly shape the future of the Russian Empire. The serfs had been freed, but the struggle for equality and justice was far from over. The societal and political unrest had given birth to a new generation of revolutionaries, and their ideas would continue to challenge the established order. The seeds of rebellion had been sown. All empires must come to an end, and the Russian Empire was no exception. A series of events led to the fall of this once mighty empire, events that would change the face of the world forever. In the early 20th century, Russia found itself entangled in a string of international conflicts. The Russo-Japanese War was a significant blow to the empire's prestige. It was the first time in modern history that a European power had been defeated by an Asian one. The loss shook the empire to its core and sowed seeds of doubt about the Tsar's ability to lead. Then came the Great War, World War I, a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. Russia, unprepared and ill-equipped, suffered immense casualties. The war took a heavy toll on the country, draining resources, causing widespread food shortages, and exacerbating social unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, the Russian Revolution erupted. The people, tired of war and suffering, rose against their rulers. The revolution was a pivotal moment, a turning point that marked the beginning of the end for the Russian Empire. In the face of mounting pressure, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne in 1917. His abdication marked the end of the Romanov dynasty, a lineage that had ruled Russia for over 300 years. With his departure, the empire that had been built over centuries crumbled, paving the way for the formation of a new government, a new era. The fall of the empire was not just an end, but a beginning. It marked the birth of a new political order, the Soviet Union, which would go on to shape much of the 20th century. And so, the Russian Empire, once a beacon of power and progress, came to a tumultuous end. Its fall serves as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of power and the inexorable march of history. Even the mightiest of empires can crumble, but their legacies live on, influencing the course of history long after they're gone.